is the DeFi Decoded podcast by 9 Point Partners. The ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast should not be taken as investment advice. Always consult with your financial advisor before investing.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of DeFi Decoded. I am Alex Tapscott, here with co-host Andrew Young. Andrew, a topic that has come in and out of favor in the media over the last couple of years has been the metaverse. And I think like a lot of new and emerging technologies and phenomena, it's one that a lot of people have struggled to define. And I'm going to offer basically two different ways of looking at this. So the first is the metaverse that is being touted by companies like Meta, aka Facebook, Microsoft, and other large corporations. In the Meta version of the metaverse, they have created virtual worlds where you can go and interact, socialize, be entertained, consume content, buy and sell goods and so forth. But when you enter these worlds, you have no real control over your experience. You have no privacy, and anything you buy or earn in those environments, you don't get to keep. Or at least if you do keep them, they're heavily taxed on the way out the door. And to me, this doesn't really feel like some new plane of human existence, a new shared reality that promises to sort of forge a new frontier for the web. To me, it sounds a lot like virtual Disneyland. And Disneyland is fun and it's profitable and lots of people go there. But Disneyland is not reinventing the human experience. On the other side of this debate is the question of an open metaverse. And an open metaverse is something that I think is still pretty amorphous because it's very much in development. But in an open metaverse, the virtual world has some of the same basic kinds of rules that exist in the real world. As individuals, you have a basic right to privacy, you've got the right to ownership, property rights, and you have the freedom to transact. If you buy or earn something in one environment, you can move it to the next one. Another layer of this is the idea that these different kinds of environments, even if they're created by individual companies who have a profit motive and are trying to create some experience, are interoperable, that these different environments connect to each other in a fairly seamless way. And in this new open metaverse, a lot of the sort of basic underlying framework would look kind of like the first era of the web, where you have a set of common protocols and you have a set of governance standards and organizations that kind of create the conditions for private companies to build stuff on the web. Just like in the open metaverse, you've got a set of organizations and standards and technologies to build stuff in this open environment. The only problem with that is that, I'm realizing I'm on a bit of a spiel here, but anyway, I'm going to keep going. The only problem with that is that what are those organizations? Who is doing this? What are those standards? These are the questions I think a lot of people have, because it's one thing to talk about this stuff and how great it is, but it's quite another to put it into practice. Fortunately, we have an excellent guest who can help us to unpack all of this. A friend and longtime collaborator, Alfred Tom, who's the co-founder and CEO of Wivity, and executive director and board member of OMA3. So let's talk about OMA3 just for a second. OMA3, the Open Metaverse Alliance for Web3, is a collaboration of Web3 metaverse platform creators. The goal here is to ensure that virtual land, digital assets, ideas, and services are highly interoperable, as I mentioned, between platforms and transparent to all communities. OMA3 is open to all Web3 metaverse builders. Now, I'm not going to steal Alfred's thunder, but a lot of the most important organizations in this space are adherents and members and active contributors to OMA3. And so we're going to figure out and talk to Alfred about why that is the case. But first, Alfred, thanks so much. Welcome to DeFi Decoded.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the podcast.
So Alfred, we always like to ask people, how did you get your start in the Web3 space? Like me, you don't look like this is your first job, and I'd be curious to know what that journey looks like to this point in time.
Yeah, it's a long journey. I guess my first introduction to Web3 was going through an accelerator in San Francisco in 2017, and that was when the ICO boom happened, and some interesting companies came through there, and I said, okay, I need to learn more about this whole Web3 thing. It wasn't called Web3 back then. It was basically Ethereum and Bitcoin. So I looked into it and said, hey, so a lot of our background of my team fits really well with this industry. Computer network protocols, cybersecurity, cryptography, and then also our background in running industry consortia, which we've been doing since like the early 90s. So I said, like, we have to study this and see if we have value here. We can add value, and we decided we could, and that's how we got started. Looking at helping different industry consortia build their Web3 standards and specifications. And OMA3 is just the latest one.
So who's a member of OMA3 today?
We have almost 100 members. So it was founded by some of the really big Web3 metaverse and gaming companies back in 2022. Animoca Brands, Upland, Space, Decode / Alien Worlds, Dapper Labs, just to name a few. And then several came on after Sandbox. Several came on afterwards: Decentraland, Unstoppable Domains, Yuga Labs, Magic Eden. So some pretty big names in the creator space. And I say that OMA3 is focused on metaverse gaming and NFTs at this point. So yeah, you can just go to our website, and I can't name them all, but there are almost 100 companies there that are due paying members of OMA3.
So what are they hoping to get out of being a member of OMA3? Is it a way to have a seat at the table to see what their competitors, collaborators are up to? Is it a way to create conditions that are favorable to them, or is it something bigger? Like, what do you think is driving each of those individual companies to be part of this consortium?
Yeah. So part of it is just to be associated with OMA3 and its members. It's mostly publicity, PR, but there are dozens of companies who are highly active in the OMA3 working groups. And those are companies that perhaps have built a technology and they have realized the technology means nothing unless they have a network effect or a community that adopts the technology. And they said, okay, let's try to see if we can build the standards in the metaverse, the Web3 metaverse, so that our products are going to reach a broader audience and have more usability. So that's another reason. And then some people are very mission driven, right? They want to build the open internet. They want to build the open metaverse in a way that's decentralized and user owned. And those are sort of like the more mission driven companies that have been part of OMA3.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to drill down on a couple of those things you mentioned. One is around standards. So just as a practical matter, like, people listening to this show, maybe they don't really know what we're talking about. But, there are these virtual environments that have been created by projects, companies in Web3, where individuals can go and play games, or they can, trade assets, or they can have experiences with their favorite creators and artists. And the difference between this and other sort of virtual worlds is that people are able to buy and sell things. And if they buy it for one price and sell it for a higher price, they can make some money. But they can also earn assets by contributing to these networks, to these projects, and they can kind of take them around with them, right? Like if you buy an asset like a Solana NFT, it's fungible across different applications that connect to that network. Same with Ethereum. And that's very different to how things work, in say Roblox, where, you go into a virtual world and you buy the virtual currency and you can spend it in that environment, and that's about it, right? It's like Walt Disney dollars. Now, I've always wondered, okay, so there are some minimum viable sort of basic standards, right? Like NFT standards. But once you get beyond that to, let's say, gaming, for example, there's going to be a real challenge between taking things from one environment and moving them into another, like a card trading game versus a first-person shooter, or a game that takes place in the future versus one that takes place in medieval times or something, right? So I'm talking about virtual goods that don't obviously kind of translate into different environments. So that's like very high level in the sense that you'd have to solve a lot of problems before you even got to that point. But what are those sort of basic standards that you think most players can agree on so that we actually have a common set of rules for the open metaverse?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the challenge and the interesting aspect of building standards for the metaverse, right? You're essentially building a universe, a 3D universe, and there are lots of complexities that you mentioned, right? Bringing a laser gun into a world that has, a medieval theme. How do you enable that, right?
Yeah.
Or do you even enable that?
Do you even enable it? Like, is that a problem we're even trying to solve, or should that be something that's like, of course that's not going to work. It is what it is. I don't
It's absolutely a problem you need to solve, right?
know.
So, and the way we are proposing to solve it is to have the destination world, have the final say on whether you can bring something in, right?
Okay.
So, it's like traveling in the airport, going to another country, right? Customs looks at what you have. You can't bring this in here, right?
Sure.
Or you
Interesting.
can't bring that. So there's a negotiation that has to happen between the source, the originating platform and the destination platform. Okay, what assets you cannot bring in? And so there's have to be all the file formats and the metadata that supports that negotiation. And so that's why we partnered pretty closely with the Metaverse Standards Forum, which is another consortium that's focused on mostly Web 2. And some of the biggest players in Web 2 are part of that consortium. Qualcomm, NVIDIA, Microsoft, the big guys in Web 2 are part of that. And so we leverage them to bring use cases for the metaverse into Web 3. Asset interoperability is one of them. One of the big projects they're working on is two different file formats. Getting technical here, but one is called GLTF and the other is called USD. How do you make them interoperable? How do you make them interoperable between platforms? Avatars. How do I bring an avatar look and feel in one platform to another platform, and so they look the same? So that's happening in sort of like the Web 2 world. And then our job at OMA3 is to make sure that that type of interoperability is brought into the Web 3 world where the user actually owns the assets and their NFTs on blockchains and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Andrew?
So yeah, it sounds like it's almost like a cross-chain. I mean, not to simplify it too much, but it's almost like you said, it's almost like cross-chain for metaverse in a way, but between different protocols. What do you think, like the final results? I guess, like, why would what's the big benefit of having all of these things sort of interoperable? Like, is there some new types of use cases or sort of like financial transactions or something along those lines that sort of comes with having all of these things being able to sort of speak together?
Right. Well, a lot of these games, the Web 2 and Web 3 metaverse games and platforms, a lot of the times they make their money on selling virtual goods. Fortnite's most of their revenue comes from selling virtual goods. So in the property world or in the real world, something that you can bring with you to different cities, states, countries is going to have more value to you than something that you can only use in one specific location. So the idea is that if you make these assets interoperable and you can bring them wherever you are, that's going to increase the value of that asset. Users are willing to pay more for that asset, which increases the revenue for all the different platforms involved in that interoperability, right? So that's one example. But I think, just philosophically, if you look back at the internet, there was CompuServe and AOL before, and then Netscape introduced, the open internet with their Navigator browser, and that just kind of blew everything open, right?
Yeah.
And it made it permissionless. All these cool applications came out, and that's why we're trying to build the standards for the open metaverse to enable that same type of innovation.
Do you think that the metaverse needs a web browser? Like, what is the web browser of the metaverse? Because there's the open internet existed, like, Tim Berners-Lee created the World Wide Web, but there was no interface for it. And then Mark Andreessen created Mosaic, which became Netscape, and that became the first way that we did that. And like the Navigator, the web browser is this platform that it's neutral. I mean, it's created by a company and create a lot of money for whoever builds it, but it allows you to access with a URL any website. So what is the equivalent that lets you to access any metaverse? Is it a wallet? This is an analogy that I've sort of toyed with before in the past. That like
Yeah.
the web browser is to Web 1, what the App Store is to Web 2, what the wallet is to Web 3. But is that actually true? Or is that like your view, or do you have another sort of take on that?
Yeah, so when the web first started, nobody knew anything about that. There was Minitel before that, right? That was
Yeah.
like widespread, internet style use. Um, but we already have sort of like the foundations of the building blocks of the open metaverse already in browsers, in applications, on closed platforms like iOS, and PlayStation and Xbox and things like that. So consumers are already used to that. How do you tie all those together and make them compatible?
Yeah.
Um, and then from there, you let the free market decide, okay, what is going to be the best mechanism? Is it going to be a metaverse browser, right? Is it going to be a normal browser? Is it going to be an app store like experience, like Steam or iOS? So as a consortium, you want to be able to standardize what's absolutely necessary to standardize. You don't want to standardize too much. That will stifle innovation. So that's always the balancing act of a standards body or a consortium. And so
Right.
we'll create the interface that whether you're a downloadable client or a website in a web browser, you can use so that your avatar can jump through a portal in a web browser and then end up on an iOS app.
Interesting. And so, what would you say that there are any standards that you've created so far that are now broadly applicable across your 100 plus members or across these different environments?
I think we're getting there. You know, the standards that exist right now are web standards built by W3C. And as far as identity goes, for example, the DID standard, the Decentralized Identity Foundation, um, and then there's just HTML, HTTP, those basic protocols. And then there's organizations like the Metaverse Standards Forum and OMA3 trying to create metaverse specific standards. So GLTF is a standard, that's promoted by the Kronos Group. USD is now a standard that's being created by the Alliance for Open USD. And so the Metaverse Standards Forum sort of is a forum for coordinating all those standards and making sure that they're all interoperable. But yeah, we're not there yet. We're getting there very, we'll get there pretty quickly, I think. We'll see some news out of OMA3 introducing some specifications, and then things are going to happen within the Metaverse Standards Forum as well.
Do you think, like, I guess the standards is sort of like the first piece, like you said, like it kind of reminds me of how like once we had ERC20 as a format for tokens, we saw an explosion in tokens, and then sort of the second piece was we had all these exchanges ready to actually list these tokens, and which created speculation, which led to more tokens. So I guess what I'm asking is, it sounds like you're working on the first piece. What do you think that second piece looks like? Like that liquidity hub, whether that's like a specific chain, or is it a decentralized exchange, or is it even centralized exchanges directly? I guess what does that like future liquidity hub for the metaverse look like?
Yes, we still don't know really yet, right? So I think a lot of the interesting thing about the metaverse is that it's an alternate reality, right? Everything that exists in real life and in the internet can sort of be expressed in a 3D nature in the open metaverse. So yeah, there's going to be all the commerce that you see in Web 2 and Web 3 happening in the metaverse. We're working on different use cases within the Metaverse Standards Forum, things like, okay, credit scores in the metaverse, reputation in the metaverse, So these are all the things that you're laying the groundwork for and trying to predict what consumers are going to be doing. We're not going to be able to predict everything, right? And so we have to be pretty nimble when we see things cropping up and see if there needs to be an interoperability standard for it.
Yeah, interesting. I think about that a lot. Like I do often wonder how we create these different kinds of standards that that can connect all these different kinds of worlds together. Like what that process actually looks like. Like I'm trying to remember the IETF and ICANN, for example, the Internet Engineering Task Force, and ICANN, which I think handles like domain names in the internet world. I'm a little rusty on that, but like
Yep. Right.
they have like a process, like a really formulaic process that helps to gather opinions from different stakeholders and bring them together and have them, commit comments and all this stuff. Have you developed that type of process internally to actually like arrive at these different standards?
Yeah. So consortia, I always like to say that consortia are like the original DAO, right? They're decentralized autonomous organizations.
Right.
Um, for decades, the largest companies in the world that are arch enemies in the marketplace are meeting together and cooperating on how to, build Wi-Fi, how to build Bluetooth, um, how to build the web browsers, HTML. And some of those organizations are more efficient than others.
Yeah.
And so there is a best practices for cooperating to build standards and infrastructure. And so that's the experience that I bring. I'm not a metaverse expert. I'm a standardization and collaboration expert.
Yeah. Well, that's what
Um,
because you've got the metaverse experts as your members, right? That you got to get
exactly.
agreeing on something.
Right. So, one of the things that the Web3 world and some of the foundations can learn from is the good standards bodies and consortia always start with use cases. All right. So define the use cases first. So for example, for ESG20, what is this going to be used for, right? Then you build requirements, and then you start getting to proposals on how you're going to address a use case. And that's important because it gets everybody thinking about the same use cases. And it also makes sure that when you design something, you're addressing all the possible use cases in case you don't design something that meets one use case, but doesn't meet another important use case. And if you consider that other use case, you would have been able to make a few tweaks in the standard to address the other use case. So a good example of this is NFT royalties. So the ERC 721 extensions have said, okay, well, if an NFT is transferred on a marketplace, the creator should get a certain percentage of that sale as a royalty or a commission. They didn't really think through the ways that marketplaces could use this, and so marketplaces started circumventing those royalties. So one of the things that OMA3 is working on is how do we standardize or ensure that creators get their royalties on commissions of secondary sales if that's what they want.
Right.
So if you follow a certain process, you kind of fill those holes as much as possible.
Right. Interesting.
But this is probably geeky stuff that most people don't care about, but it's highly important to collaboration.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, the thing that I gathered from that comment, well, lots, but one is, use cases and standards. So like, there's going to be a point where you're going to need everyone to agree on something because there's demand and there's a drive from users for a specific thing. I wonder what that is. I mean, again, we have certain standards, they may not interoperate, but there's wallet standards and there's token standards like ERC20 and NFT, ERC to 721 and like all these different things. Those already exist, I guess. And then there's like this second order of standard that needs to get created. Anyway, something to think about. Hey, so in the introduction, I don't know if I mentioned this, but you are the founder of OMA3, but you're also the founder of Wivity, co-founder and CEO. So tell us a little bit about Wivity and its relationship vis-a-vis OMA3.
Right. So like I said, well, Wivity and my colleagues at Wivity are standardization collaboration experts.
Yeah.
And so OMA3 brought us in to say, hey, you know how to build standards consortia. Help us to build this for the Web3 metaverse. And that's what we did. We're also helping other consortia that have existed for a long time to look at Web3 as a mechanism to accomplish what they want to accomplish. So, for example, we work with in the energy sector with Sunspec Alliance to figure out how Web3 can be used to help secure the distributed energy grid. We also realized that Web3 has a lot to bring to the standardization process. For example, OMA3 launched a token. Now it's a token that's initially can only be used within OMA3, but what the token does is that it solves what industry consortia have as a problem, which is it's the free rider problem, right? The tragedy of the commons. So if companies contribute to OMA3, they get points in the different seasons that we have, just like a normal DAO or a normal infrastructure project. And then those points convert into tokens at some point. And then after a year, the token gets traded on the public market, and then they get some type of, reward for their contributions to OMA3. And the interesting thing about the token is, I think, in many ways, a token could be the missing piece for a lot of other, consortium blockchains, whatever. I read recently that the Contour blockchain that was for, trade finance, had a lot of members. They recently shut down because the revenues did not, weren't enough to pay for the expenses. But for a lot of organizations and startups, when you come out, there's going to be a period of time when your revenues are not going to cover your expenses. And that's why you raise equity and try to float the company to the point where your revenues start paying for expenses. And so the token can be used as a mechanism to help these organizations float their expenses until revenue meets their expenses. And so OMA3 is the first organization we've worked with that has actually gone through that process, is going through that process.
Interesting. Andrew?
Yeah, I wanted to sort of shift gears a little bit, if that's all right. I want to know, we spend a ton of time on this podcast talking about sort of which chains which chains are seeing the most growth. What are the sort of things that people, whether it's users or investors, should be sort of paying attention to. And I'm sort of just curious from your perspective, you have probably some of the most insight into the sort of the metaverse space and whatnot. What are the chains that you think are kind of leading the way, both in terms of just standardizing and also just being sort of prepared for this expected huge bull market in metaverse?
Right. Yeah. Honestly, I don't see any real front runner from a chain specific layer 1, layer 2. There are a lot of in the metaverse and gaming. You're not so concerned about where's all the liquidity, right? You're creating in a way your own marketplace. So we see a lot of action on people building layer 2s and layer 3s on Ethereum. We see a lot of action in the Cosmos ecosystem, so Saga in their chainlets, a lot of gaming companies are going on them. Avalanche, also lots of subnets on Avalanche, focused on gaming in the metaverse. So I don't see any winner right now, and that's what makes it actually really interesting for OMA3, right? So if you look at some of the top platforms that are members of OMA3, Upland is on the EOS platform. Alien Worlds is on the Wax platform. My Neighbor Alice is on a chain called Chromia. And those are non-EVM, chains. And so when we think about interoperability, we have to incorporate those types of chains when we do the interoperability. And that will make things that we build extremely, applicable to any type of environment.
I think that's the key, because I do think we're talking about what metaverse standards, but it feels like the blockchain world itself has not coalesced around a set of standards even to begin with, before we even get to the metaverse point, right? So, EVM compatibility would be probably priority number one, but Solana compatibility is important, Cosmos ecosystem, IBC chain compatibility, all those different things you're talking about. So it's like you got to get the first order problem solved first before you can move on to the next one. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Albert.
Yeah, I mean, Ethereum has driven the standards work within the Ethereum Foundation with all the EIP process, but it's very focused on EVM. And obviously, there's all these other chains cropping up, right? There's the Move system ecosystem. There's, the Rust ecosystem. There's other languages coming out, and so how do you build interoperability between all those different types of EVMs? And I think OMA3 is one of the few companies that or organizations that's kind of focused on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, Alfred, this has been a very interesting discussion. We appreciate you coming on and telling us a little bit about it. And congratulations on getting 100+ organizations to all agree that this is important and having them all working on this problem with you. I think it's really, really terrific. And as I said at the outset, at least I'm rooting for OMA3 to be successful, because I think that the promise of the Open Metaverse is significant. And I actually think it's the only version of the Metaverse that enables sort of freedom of commerce, of identity, of expression, in the way that we'd like to achieve in the real world, right? Where we're not confined to walled gardens controlled by big companies who set the rules and dictate the terms. And for that reason alone, I think it's important, very important work that you're doing. So thanks for coming on. That's it for today's episode of DeFi Decoded. I am Alex Tapscott here with Andrew Young. Got lots of great guests coming up in the next little while. Please make sure to like, share, and comment on the podcast wherever you get it or listen to it. It helps other people find the show. Until next time, take care. Bye.
The information contained herein does not constitute an offer or solicitation by anyone in the United States or in any other jurisdiction in which such an offer or solicitation is not authorized, or to any person to whom it is unlawful to make such an offer or solicitation. Prospective investors who are not residents in Canada should contact their financial advisor to determine whether securities of the funds may be lawfully sold in their jurisdiction.